That radio chick Cheryl Lee here. Welcome to the Still Rocking It podcast, where we'll have music, news reviews and interviews with some of our favourite Australian musicians and artists. Today we chat with Karin Keays about her new book. It's Because I Love You is the story of Karin Keays' real-life rock and roll romance, and possibly the first such book to be written from the unique perspective of a woman who has lived and worked for 35 years in the inner sanctum of rock and roll royalty. At times vastly amusing, fascinating, insightful, and also deeply tragic. The story of a fairy tale life that goes suddenly and shockingly wrong, turning into a nightmare of maternal loss and grief. Amidst the dizzying highs and devastating lows of life in the Australian music industry, Karin's is an inspirational story of healing and redemption woven through a true love story for all time. To catch up on podcasts from other favourite artists, simply go to thatradiochick.com.au. You're with Cheryl Lee, and I'd like to welcome into the Zoom room today Karin Keays, and she has got an amazing story to tell that I'm sure we're all going to be really interested in. And there's also a previously unreleased album of hubby Jim's that we must remember to hear all about before we leave today. But first, your new book. I'm halfway through. I've laughed, I've cried. And before we chat about that, how was the launch last Friday?
Oh, it was magical. It was fabulous, thanks, Cheryl. It was a beautiful courtyard. It was early evening. I spent most of the time signing books. I didn't get to do a lot of socialising, but I had friends there that are in the book from early on. For instance, Lisa, you'll read about her in the book. She was looking after our children when I was in hospital having William, our daughters. She and her husband David were there. It was a wonderful, magical evening.
So glad. It's not a book about being married to a rock star, is it? Although obviously you were married to a rock star, so Jim is in it. But yes, it's about love and loss and fighting for what's right and surviving together and coming through another loss yet again.
Yes, exactly. It's about my life. Originally, I started to write about William, our son, after he died. I learned a lot from the coronial process and just dealing with all the legal aspects of that. I thought I wanted to write about it and share it. It took me a long time, and I thought, what, I can't just write about William without writing about the love that he was created from. So that was how the book started. I started writing like that, but then when I finally sat down to write it, I wrote it as my life story or my love story.
It absolutely is a love story. And I love reading it because the way that you write, it's just like, we're sitting down and we're having a conversation and we're old friends and you're telling me all about it. And I love that. Such a beautiful read so far. Now, Jim, he fell in love with you at first sight, didn't he? The very first time he laid eyes on you.
He did. I didn't know it at the time. I thought he couldn't stand me because he wouldn't look at me. This is not going to work because I was a prospective tenant, in his house. And I thought, he hates me. So, but as it turns out, he told me later he just didn't know where to look because he was poleaxed. So, it was very romantic when he told me. Before that, it wasn't.
We don't want to give the whole thing away because I absolutely encourage those listening to grab the book and have a read for yourself. But you mentioned a couple of things early on, your day out or night out with Annette Day, who, of course, is our Daisy's widow from Support Act, because I'm on the committee. Support Act SA.
I love Support Act. I love Support Act. Yeah. And Support Act will actually feature in the sequel to this book, in the second book. But I won't give anything else away.
Is that a scoop? There's a sequel coming?
There is. Because you haven't read the end of the book yet. Otherwise you would know.
That's right. How exciting. We love Annette. We have a fundraising luncheon every month here in South Australia.
I should get over to Adelaide more often because there's so many people who I just love over there, such as Annette, and I haven't seen them for ages. And, for instance, Annette and I, our lives often very parallel, similarities.
That's right.
In the best ways and also in the saddest
worst. You both lost husbands, relatively young, really.
Yes, that's true. Since then, because this will come in the second book, Well, actually, no, maybe I shouldn't say that because I don't want to give anything away. Yeah.
Watch this space. It's set against the backdrop of the music industry, obviously, and tours and gigs and albums and other rock stars. And you and Jim have two beautiful daughters together. And then the unthinkable happens.
I was pregnant very soon after having Bonnie. I fell pregnant with William. He unfortunately died about 6.5 hours after he was born as a result of, in my opinion, being induced artificially.
Losing a child, which I just cannot imagine. And I think one of your girlfriends summed it up the best when she walked into your hospital room and she just thought, how are you still breathing? But to lose a child is bad enough, but to think that it possibly could have been avoided somehow must just be hard. That's when I cried, obviously.
Yes. And
most
everybody told me
heartbreaking.
to let it be, to just get on with it. And I did try for a while until, I'm not sure where you are in the book, but something happened that made it obvious that I couldn't turn the other way.
It's very brave of you to follow that through, because anything that anybody can do to avoid this sort of thing happening to another mother, another family, you're so, so brave.
Thank you. Brave, I don't know. I just feel like it's something I had to do. I've almost felt like I couldn't live with myself if I didn't do it.
You had to do it for William?
Yes, and for my daughters, because one day hopefully they'll be mums themselves, mothers-to-be, and their friends who I love and adore, all my children's friends, they're like daughters to me as well. How could that ever happen to one of them and I hadn't said or tried my best to make sure that it didn't happen again?
Whatever you can do to pinpoint the errors and stop them from ever happening again.
Creating change for the better.
You are listening to Still Rocking It, the podcast with Cheryl Lee.
Let's hear Turn Up Your Radio, one of Master's Apprentice's most recognisable songs, a hit for them in 1970, making it to number 7 on the Australian charts. And then back to speak some more to Karin.
Rock and roll and you're still doing it now.
Just a little bit of history, although I think everybody listening to my podcast would be fully aware of the rock starness of your hubby. Inducted into the ARIA Hall of Fame in 1998. We have actually seen each other before, Karin, 10 years ago at the Goodwood Institute here in Adelaide, when Jim was to be inducted into the SA Music Hall of Fame with the Master's Apprentices. But unfortunately, you lost him just a few weeks before that event.
Very sadly, yes, he did. He succumbed finally to, it was, the cancer treatment taken its toll on his body, the cancer/treatment, and he got an infection and it turned into pneumonia and he just couldn't fight it off.
Yes, such a sad, sad loss. It was our 3rd SA Music Hall of Fame induction. I'm just reading from some of the reviews of that night. There was an overwhelming air of dignity and respect for the late Jim Keays, former lead singer of iconic Australian group The Master's Apprentices. He was inducted alongside fellow original band members Brian Fortin, Mick Bauer, Rick Morris and Gavin Webb. Accepting the award for Jim were his wife Karin and daughters Holly and Bonnie, who spoke highly of their late father and were very excited to see the original members reunited for the very first time in almost 50 years. And your beautiful daughters sang that night with the Master's Apprentices.
Amazing, because they do not sing. It's not that they can't sing. Often I've found a thing with the children of people who are in the music industry or whatever, or actors, they'll either go there, they'll really take after their parents and just run with it, or they'll say, no, not for me, I'm going the other way. I can't even get them to sing at home. But they did that night.
It was so beautiful. That's actually one of my questions for later. I was going to ask if either of your daughters did follow into the family business, the music industry. No, and it's not because they just don't want to. They want to make their own way, and I think Jim would admire that too, because he was very much a man who made his own way in life, an individual, and he did what he wanted to do and was what he wanted to be. So they're doing their things, their own individual things, quite successfully in life. I'm very proud of the girls, and I know Jim would be too. Holly's actually living and working in London at the moment. Lucky duck.
She is, and she's over there with Tim Wheatley. She's not with him. They're in London, and I believe they're going to be meeting up very shortly to getting together. Tim's has a daughter and partner, and yeah, it'll be lovely for them to meet up again. I think the last time we saw Tim all together was in West Hollywood. All these amazing places.
Tim, of course, is the son of Glenn Wheatley, the bass player in Masters Apprentices, before becoming a talent manager, tour promoter and radio entrepreneur. Longtime manager of John Farnham, launched the career of Delta Goodrum and helped establish the Little River Band in the US. I was just reading in the book about your and Jim's trip to London, your wonderful trip, and we went earlier in the year. So your book brought back some wonderful memories for me as well.
Yes, isn't London amazing? That was our first trip. And after that, we went every year or two until Jim got sick and then he couldn't travel. In fact, he fell sick while we were over there on a trip. I love England, love London. Medieval history is my hobby. So it's the right place for me.
It certainly sounds like you were in your element, which almost surprised you a little bit, didn't it? And what did Jim say? I told you so?
Yeah. I know, because I always said, when I get travel, I want to go to Spain. You know, I've always wanted Spain. He said, no, I've been to Spain. It wasn't that good. I'm going, but that was you. I want to go to Spain. He goes, let's go to England first. I'm like, okay, look, I'm happy just to be going, really, you know, so let's go to England, you know, because you'll love it. He was right. I love it. It's beautiful.
You hate it when they're right.
You got to think, well, actually, that just shows how well he knows me.
Absolutely. Yeah. And your eldest daughter, Holly, said at the induction to the SA Music Hall of Fame that it was lovely that all the guys are there again. They've been so supportive and so honoured that Dad touched so many people. He did, you know, he was the soundtrack to so many of our lives, he and the Masters. And Karin Keays and Morris, of course. There was a beautiful moment at the end when there was a standing ovation for a remark of respect for one of Australia's greatest entertainers. I loved reading that and remembering that night 10 years ago here. It was a beautiful night.
And Jim, he would have loved to have been there because he intended to be there.
The iconic chorus of "Do what you want to do, be what you want to be" was sung by all of us in the crowd in unison. It was a beautiful thing.
It is a beautiful thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
That song, it never fails. It never failed. You know, Jim would sing it. Well, usually it was always the encore, even with Karin Keays and Morris. If it wasn't Because I Love You, it would be, you know, the real thing.
Still Rockin' It podcast with that radio chick, Cheryl Lee. Back to speak to Karin shortly, but here it is now, the song that was often the encore during Karin Keays and Morris shows, Because I Love You.
Do what you want to do, be what you want to be, yeah.
Interestingly, last week, John Bywaters from the Twilights, who was the very first inductee into the SA Music Hall of Fame, inducted our 153rd inductee, Guy Sebastian. And we were there on the red carpet to interview him last week. And it's just a lovely thing to go in and see the artists and their memorabilia at the display.
Yeah.
I'm just so glad that Jim is a part of it. He comes from fabulous, strong Scottish stock, doesn't he?
He does. He certainly does. Keays is his adoptive name. The Keays came from sort of down the River Clyde Bank, I think they call it. And when Jim was very young, they emigrated to Adelaide. Jim was about 6 months old when his mother, his single mother, unmarried mother, gave him up for adoption. Jim and Jessie Keays had passed away in the 70s. When he was about 40, his natural mother had been looking for him ever since she gave him up, and she found him. It really was amazing. I mean, it was just before I met Jim, not too long, a year or so before I met Jim, maybe year two. So, yeah, it was an incredible time. It was a happy, sad story because she said she would never have another child until she found her boy. So, yeah, and in those days, apparently what they used to do, they would fudge the trail, so it wasn't made easy to find him.
So glad that they found each other. Yeah, that's just another part of the whole fabric of this amazing story, isn't it?
It is. And I gained wonderful parents-in-law. Well, you'll read my father-in-law, to whom I was very close. And Nancy, she was amazing. She passed away early in the millennium. I should stop there because you wouldn't be up to that yet.
No spoilers. Everyone else, you'll have to grab the book and read it like me. A little bit more about you, Karin. You live in Melbourne and the Gold Coast, you lucky bugger.
Yes, I know. Quite by accident, I was born and raised on the Gold Coast. I'm a Gold Coast girl. Right now, I'm at my parents' house on the Gold Coast. I moved to Melbourne, when I met Jim, got married, raised a family there, all of that. I never thought I would come back to the coast either, by the way. I thought if I was going to move anywhere, it would be to England. But yes, I did. A couple of years ago, it was after all the chaos of those 3 years. And what I found at some points in time there is I'd be in Melbourne, lockdown, and both of my ageing parents were in hospital at the same time, and I couldn't get to them. I couldn't even cross the border. And even if I did cross the border, I wasn't allowed into the hospital. After the 3 weeks quarantine, hotel quarantine, I still wouldn't have been allowed into the hospital. I thought, so Bonnie moved out a couple of years ago, and I thought, okay, what am I going to do? I could be anywhere I want. So I thought, well, I don't ever want to be separated from my parents again. If the government pulls anything like that again, I don't want to be apart from them. I want to be Queenslander again. So technically I'm a Queenslander, but I do spend a lot of time in Melbourne.
You are listening to Still Rocking It, the podcast with Cheryl Lee.
Here's an interesting one I found for you. Jim Keays' Southern Cross Band, their version of Undecided. And back to speak again to Karin Keays shortly.
I wanna be your true loving man, babe.
In your book, we learn that you and Jim were both fabulous AFL supporters. Do you still get along to the footy?
I don't. I haven't been yet, mainly because I can't work out where I am at any given time.
Yeah.
Should I be a Melbourne member or should I be here? But so, yes, I was actually originally a Brisbane Bear, one of 6 fully paid up Melbourne members of the Bears. Then they merged with Fitzroy, and that's because I was known at the club because there was only 6 of us. So the club gave me a call and said, do you think Jim would help us with the lyrics to the new club song? I've gone, yes, yes. So there we are. Jim wrote the lyrics to the Brisbane Lions club song, and he went in, produced it, recorded the first one. It's been re-recorded since, but the lyrics are all Jim's.
There's another feather in his cap.
Oh, he has many.
That's right. And part of the whole fabric of the story. The launch of your first book coincides with the release of new music by Jim. Don't give it all away. The album is called Caledonia. How did that stay hidden for 23 years?
Yes.
That's amazing.
It's amazing. I'm going to backtrack right to the start because I haven't written this part in the book. When we first became engaged, Roy Orbison, who Jim loved, and I loved too, by the way, had just released an album, Mystery Girl. I think it was called Mystery Girl. And he died just as it was released, very sadly. And it went number 1 all around the world. It was, immense. And Jim said, that's the way to do it, He said, always have one in the can for when I die. Those were his words back in 88. He recorded various albums and then he recorded Caledonia, and it did sit there because I was heavily pregnant with Bonnie. I had her in September. This was recorded in middle of the year in 2001. He was busy with Cotton, Keys and Morris, and then leading into the Long Way to the Top tour, which Masters Apprentices, the stadium tour was on. That was huge. After that, there was the regional tour for Long Way to the Top, and then I was pregnant with William, and then William was born and passed away, and it just sat there. There wasn't the right time to release it, and he did raid a few songs from it in 2006 that he re-recorded and put on Resonator, the acoustic album, but the whole album just sat there. A lot of people forgot about it, didn't know about it. I always knew it was there, and it just was waiting for the right time, and this is the time.
It certainly is, and it does hark back a little bit to Jim's Scottish heritage.
Totally. The name Caledonia means Scotland. It's ancient Roman name for Scotland. I wanted to call Bonnie Caledonia. Jim said, you can't call the child that.
He said, no, I'm going to call my album that.
Good name for the album. It's like giving birth.
Absolutely.
I'm creating, it's like or writing a book. It's like giving birth to something. So not quite child, but Yeah, so it was actually a really good name for it because a lot of the songs, I'm looking down at it here, it's a very deeply personal album for Jim. When you listen to the lyrics, it's deeply personal, beautiful, beautiful album. I hesitate to say my favourite because they're all my favourites, like all your children, but
Yes.
really is a beautiful album. It sounds like it was recorded yesterday. It doesn't sound dated.
No.
It's classic.
It's timeless.
Yes, yeah.
It's so beautiful, and it's just been tucked away there, ready for the right time. And clearly, with the release of your book, now's the time for it to shine.
We're working in partnership with Ambition Music. They have released a DVD of Turn Up Your Video, which we produced around about the same time years ago. It's been sitting there doing nothing, so that's out again. And there's more to come. We're going to be releasing all of Jim's back catalogue.
Remastered. Fantastic.
Yeah, there's a lot to look forward to.
Yeah. There's another scoop for you, listeners. Start saving your JB Hi-Fi vouchers for Christmas. Oh. Good luck with the album Caledonia and the Master's Apprentice documentary, Turn Up Your Video. I'm excited to see that as well. Funnily enough, Karin, the Master's Apprentices, or the current version of, which still has Brian and Mick in it, played this weekend, just gone, in Adelaide here.
Right.
Yeah.
Awesome.
We're very spoiled here in Adelaide. We still get the opportunity to hear all those fabulous songs and walk down memory lane and remember Jim and remember the hits. It's a great opportunity for us to have that little nostalgia hit.
Yes.
Yeah. Congratulations. As I say, it is so far so good. It's a wonderful, wonderful read. And, you know, if you want to have a little sneak peek at a little bit of what it's like to be married to an Australian rock legend, get out and buy Karin Keays' book. Stay tuned for the second version. Thank you so much, Karin, for spending some of your time with us in our Zoom room today. We really appreciate it. All the best with everything going forward. I think you're amazing, and I would love to meet you in person one day. I hope we can.
Oh, I hope so very soon. And thank you, Cheryl. My pleasure chatting with you. Thank you.
Still Rocking It podcast with that radio chick, Cheryl Lee. Let's go out, shall we, with one of the songs from Caledonia, Waiting for the Big One.
Waiting for the big one. Life goes on, just like it's always done.
You're with Cheryl Lee, that radio chick. Thank you so much for joining me on the Still Rocking It podcast. Hope to catch you again next time. Get out when you can, support Aussie music, and I'll see you down the front.